Good morning and welcome to Module 4, where we are going to begin talking about communication. So within a team and team setting, especially in the work setting, but also in family and life and church and sports, communication is vitally important. It is one of the foundation pieces to being effective in the tasks that you are given. And so we're going to start with talking about some of the foundation of communication in general before moving into communication in the work setting. So some of the goals for this week, we want to be able to describe the communication process. That's kind of some of that general material there. We want to contrast the advantages and disadvantages of oral versus written communication. We want to compare the effectiveness of the chain, the wheel, and all channel networks. That's when we get into more of the organization communication. We want to identify the factors affecting the use of the grapevine, so some of the pros and cons of the grapevine itself, and then discuss how computer-aided technology is changing organizational communication. So if we get to the end of the week and we can do those things well, we're well prepared to move on to some of our next material. So functions of communication. Remember that communication is one of our tools in our tool belt to help reduce stress and conflict within a team, within an organization. Effective communication goes a long way towards smoothing those points of friction. So within communication, some communication is done for control, not control in a bad way, right? Where someone's trying to control or manipulate other people, but rather that there is good structure and things aren't out of control due to a lack of communication, but everything is very seamless and functioning well. Then there's motivation. So think of inspiring speeches and going through and rallying to a cause. So there can be motivation for doing something positive or kind of reverse motivation to keep people from doing something they shouldn't do. There's emotional expression where folks are speaking out of their emotions, trying to express those in a way to make the other person understand. And then there's simply the passing on of information. Where one person has information, the other person needs that information, and then they move forward from there. So there's also this, in all these forms of communication or functions of communication, there's the communication process. So big picture, right? We've got the sender over here. We've got the receiver over here. And the sender is sending a message that the receiver is receiving. Goes kind of self-explanatory there. So within the sender, some things that are happening there's a message to be sent. So that's where either there's something that needs to be controlled, there's motivation that needs to be cultivated, there's emotions that need to be expressed, or information that needs to be shared. That is the message, right? What is being shared from the sender that they want the receiver to be the recipient of. So then they take that nugget there and they encode it. They figure out how they want to communicate the thing they are trying to communicate. That making it concise, making it deliverable is the encoding part of the message. Then there's the channel. So the channel is the means through which you communicate. So maybe that's face-to-face. Maybe that is via email. Maybe that's via letter. So what's the channel goes through and is the medium which the sender communicates to the receiver. So when the receiver receives a message, they have to go through some message decoding where they go through and unpack what is being communicated. And then at that point, we can say their message was received, where the receiver has it in their possession. Now, across all of this process, there can be external factors that make it harder to communicate. That's noise. So that can be things like the receiver having a lot on their mind of things they're needing to get to. So maybe if you're talking to your direct supervisor and they've got 3 fires that are happening simultaneously, they may not receive the message as well due to all the noise when they're trying to decode it. There can be noise through barriers, like if there's cross-cultural communication that's needing to happen, there can be language barriers that create noise that disrupt that message being received. Once the receiver receives the message, there will be some feedback given to the sender, that the sender knows the message is received. So maybe in an email, that's a read receipt, and face-to-face, a nodding of a head, some things like that. And even in the feedback, there can be noise as well. So we want to make sure that our communication is going from sender to receiver in the most efficient way possible, resulting in good processes, good communication, and that it's being effective. So there's a few different directions of communication, especially within the work setting. So there's downward communication that it goes from one level to a lower level. So think of directives and feedback coming from supervisors going to those who they are supervising. So that's downward communication. Then there's upward communication, flows from one level to a higher level. So that's going to be updates, ideas. If part of the downward communication asks for feedback, maybe that's feedback. So there is upward communication, and then there's lateral communication, people at the same level, where this can be formal or informal. Maybe some of the positives with lateral communication is that it can result in some quick actions. So maybe all the managers quickly get together because there's a problem, they decide on a solution, then they implement it. That discussion amongst all the managers is lateral communication. Within all forms of communication, it is going to be interpersonal, where 2 people are communicating. You can't have a sender without a receiver. You can't have a receiver without a sender. And so there are different types of interpersonal communication. We've got oral or verbal, we've got written, and then we've got nonverbal. And we're going to look at the pros and cons of those. So within oral communication, so this is verbal, can be face-to-face, this can be over the phone, this is using your mouth and your words to speak and communicate that way. That's kind of the channel that you're using. The advantages are speed. We can often walk down the hallway and talk to a coworker in a much faster way than sending an email. There's easier feedback where you can verify that message was received and understood. The disadvantages is that there's potential for messages to be distorted. When I was in elementary school, we would play that game called telephone, where somebody would start out with a sentence which maybe was 2 flamingos sunbathing by the ocean. And then they'd pass that on, whisper it into the ear of the next person, and they only got one shot where you could only say it one time, and by the end, the person at the end would say what the message was, and maybe it was 14 rhinoceroses are having fun. And you wonder, how did we get here? How did that message get so distorted? That's one of the disadvantages with oral communication, where the content at the destination may be different from what was originally expressed, particularly if you're using like a chain of command communication there. Within written communication, and these can be memos, letters, emails, etc. Anything that's falling into the written word is going to be written communication. The advantages are it provides a tangible and verifiable record, so you're not relying on hearsay, but you have the original message in its full and complete form. This can be stored for an indefinite period of time. It can be physically available for later reference. And then in terms of accuracy, it's more likely to be well thought out, logical, and clear. So that's positive there for written communication, that we can go back and look at things and know what was communicated, how it was communicated, and not have to rely on what people think they said and what people think they heard. The disadvantages, it can be time consuming, there can be a lack of feedback, there's no guarantee how the reader will interpret it. So at the end of this module, we're going to talk about misinterpreted emails and misinterpreted text messages. So one person can send something having one way of thinking of how it would be received, and somebody can receive it and think something completely different. And so that creates some disadvantage there. Also, that ability to go back forces folks to be more careful when they're using written communication. I encourage you to be more careful when you're using written communication, that you're not referring back, that you're not saying stuff in the written form that you would not want getting back to your supervisor, or you would not want getting to so-and-so. That's just, as a Christian, that isn't upholding our faith values, but also has a tendency to get folks in trouble. So just be mindful as you're using written communication to use the same high level of self-control and poise that you would do when you were speaking to your boss. Then nonverbal communication is just fundamentally different than oral or written communication. You're communicating things without the use of language, so the meaning of words can change depending on intonation, facial expression, physical distance. So if you say, "This is the best lesson I have ever had," and it's upbeat and it's positive, that comes across so differently than, "Wow, well, this is the best lesson I've ever had," which comes across with a lot of sarcasm, that you're communicating two completely different things using the same exact words. So nonverbal communication can really couple and go with oral communication. It doesn't always have to. As somebody can be, as you can be listening or watching something, your nonverbal communication can tell a lot of how you are receiving that information. In terms of body language, we want to think about things that body language conveys. It's the extent to which an individual likes another and is interested in his or her views. So your body language can be very open and receptive or very closed off. And then it can also refer to the status between a sender and receiver. Folks that are on the same plane may have different body language than somebody who is a clear supervisor. There can be more distance when a supervisor is talking to a supervisee, and things of that nature. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to watch a couple of videos, I believe, and then we will get into organizational communication. I'm not sure if the videos come here or after organizational communication, so we'll have to look. And but we'll continue on with this conversation before getting to our discussion post. Oh, sorry, not a discussion post. Our paper at the end of this module. Thanks, y'all.